Breaking news out of college football, where the NCAA has handed Michigan 3 years probation and other penalties for recruiting violations under former head coach Jim Harbaugh. In a release, the NCAA said 5 football coaches who were not identified reached a deal on the penalties for the original case, which centered around recruiting infractions during the COVID dead period. Without naming Harbaugh, the NCAA release says the school agreed that a head coach responsibility violation occurred and that he failed to cooperate with the investigation. After leading Michigan to a national title this year, Harbaugh returned to the NFL as head coach of the Los Angeles Chargers. Let's welcome in CBS Sports senior sports writer Dennis Dodd. Dennis, the NCAA does not make it easy when it comes to understanding why teams are in trouble. The language very legalese if you read that full release. So if you could just break down the exact violations and what they are for Michigan here.
Well, what we don't know exactly, Haley, are the violations. What we know is this was a negotiated resolution from a case that we all remember with Jim Harbaugh made famous by not cooperating at a time when Michigan was accused of bringing in players during the COVID dead period, impermissible tryouts, exceeded the number of accountable coaches on the field, evaluating players. And so this was all agreed to by Michigan, the coaches involved, the lawyers, and the NCAA. All that needs to happen now is the NCAA Committee on Infractions to rubber stamp the penalties. What we don't know are the penalties, and because this is a bifurcated case, it's still ongoing, we don't know the final resolution because Jim Harbaugh is still out there, and it's stated in the release that they still have to decide his level of complicity in, as we remember, the allegations of him misleading or even lying to NCAA investigators in this case. So we will eventually find out the penalties for Michigan, just not today. We will eventually find out the penalties for Jim Harbaugh, just not today. Adding to all of that is he's not compelled to cooperate with the NCAA because he's in the NFL. And I suspect the reason we're seeing this right now is because he is gone from Michigan in the NFL, and they can get to this point.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Harbaugh. I kind of want to follow up there because obviously he would be the, quote, head coach in this notice from the NCAA. But in terms of him maybe not cooperating there, just looking ahead here for Harbaugh, what would be any potential issues, potential penalties? Because as you mentioned, he's in the NFL, so he's not really worried about what's going on at Michigan anymore. So what's the future look like for Harbaugh in all this?
Yeah, that's really the cut to the chase moment here. What is Michigan going to get, and what is Jim Harbaugh going to get? And this is very relatable to a case going on with Arizona State right now, where they have similar allegations, and we all know that Herm Edwards is gone. He's at ESPN back as an analyst. Antonio Pierce, who was a central figure in a similar case, bringing players in during COVID, is now the head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders. And I think in both of these cases, what you're going to see here for Jim Harbaugh and those Arizona State coaches is probably a show cause penalty, maybe 5 years or more, which really doesn't matter. For those that don't know, a show cause penalty means that if a school hires you, you are going to be penalized in some way. That was changed in, I think, January of 23. I don't know if it applies to this case or not because it was ongoing. But if you hire a coach who has a show cause penalty, you're going to be penalized in some way for doing that, which is, Haley, is basically a scarlet letter. They're unhirable. The difference being Jim Harbaugh, Antonio Pierce, Herm Edwards are nowhere near coming back to college, probably ever, at least anytime soon. So I would suspect the penalty for Jim Harbaugh would be a multi-year show cause penalty, which would be a scarlet letter on his record. And for Michigan, since they already have proactively suspended him once, the Big Ten suspended him another time, obviously last season, that would mitigate the penalties. And I would say, what is Michigan going to get? I think anything short of a postseason, which I absolutely do not think they're going to get in this case, or anything short of scholarship reduction, which I absolutely do not think they're going to get in this case, would be a win, because it says so in the release. 5 former coaches, or not 5 coaches, I think all of them former right now, except for the exception of Sharon Moore, who I think is one of those, because he was suspended, Haley, if you remember, in that case where Jim Harbaugh was suspended for 3 games at the beginning of the season. Sharon Moore is one of those assistants who was suspended. So I think he's one of those. His case has been resolved. This resolves that. So I think some sort of slap on the wrist, maybe a fine, maybe some countable visits and recruiting, but nothing that would touch the athletes there today or penalize their efforts to win another championship.
Let's push this forward here, because we know the new era of Michigan football is now on the shoulders of Sharon Moore. But it kind of feels like he's been dealt a very difficult hand to get his head coaching career started here. Of course, you're dealing with this issue. You mentioned the suspension last year. So if you're Sharon Moore here, you're trying to rebuild a team that won the national championship last year. You lost a lot of talent as well. How difficult is his path now that you're dealing with all of these issues and trying to cement yourself as the new head coach of Michigan?
Well, Haley, I think this barely impacts that pursuit. Look, you're absolutely right. They lost a lot of talent. They've got to find a way. He's got to find a way for a guy that's never been a permanent head coach. He was acting head coach last year. We know that. To run a major program, and how is that going to work out? I don't think this distracts him. And maybe by the time the season kicks off, the sign stealing case will be resolved as well. Again, I don't think either of the results of these cases will impact Michigan on the field that much, if at all. So the things you're talking about are still football related. There are things he's going to have to get over and succeed with. Find a quarterback who can lead the team. Keep that philosophy, if indeed that is the same philosophy that Jim Harbaugh had. I wrote about it the night of the championship game when they won it all. He turned college football on its ear. I submit, because in an age of offense where it's been accelerating for the last 15 or 20 years, he went back to Woody Hayes. He went back to Bo Schembechler. Stop us if you can. You know what's coming. We're more physical than you. Can Sharon Moore be that coach? Does he want to be that coach? So I think those things apply more than either of these NCAA cases.
A lot of things to follow when it comes to Michigan. Dennis, we certainly appreciate you helping us wade through the legal waters that is the NCAA. Dennis, we certainly appreciate it. Remember, you can stay up to date with the college football news by listening to the Cover 3 podcast. The transfer portal is open for business, and our Cover 3 crew will have you covered on the latest moves in college football. Make sure you download and subscribe wherever you get your audio, or we've made it easy for you. You can scan that QR code on your screen.